So you think you've heard some wild HOA stories? Buckle up, because this one might top them all. It all began when my wife and I finally bought our dream property. Imagine rolling green hills, rich fertile soil, and a view so stunning it looked like something straight off a postcard. For as long as I could remember, I dreamed about starting my own vineyard, and this land was absolutely perfect for it. We also purchased a house in a nearby residential community. The neighborhood marketed itself as a place of peaceful, harmonious living. At the time, that sounded wonderful. What I didn't realize was that harmonious living was really just code for a neighborhood controlled by a power-hungry HOA president. Let's call her Karen. From the moment I moved in, Karen seemed to have a personal issue with me. My biggest offense? I wasn't retired like most of the other residents. I was younger, still working full-time, and apparently that alone made me suspicious in her eyes. She found excuses to write me up constantly. Trash bins placed outside an hour earlier than her rulebook allowed? Violation. A single weed poking through my flower bed? Violation. It didn't matter how small or ridiculous it was. She always found something. I tried to stay polite and friendly, but every conversation with Karen felt less like neighborly small talk and more like an interrogation. Honestly, I didn't want any drama. All I wanted was to live peacefully and focus on my real passion project. The vineyard I was building on a separate plot of land just outside the community. That land became my sanctuary. Every morning before heading to my day job, I would drive out there and spend hours working the soil. I planted the first rows of vines myself. It was exhausting, backbreaking work, but I loved every second of it. I poured my heart, my energy, and a large portion of my savings into turning that land into something special. Over the next 2 years, the vineyard slowly came to life. The vines grew stronger each season, spreading neatly across the rolling hills. Eventually, the first tiny clusters of grapes began to appear. Seeing those first grapes felt like watching a lifelong dream finally start to become reality. To celebrate the milestone, my wife and I decided to host a small gathering at the vineyard. Nothing big, just a few close friends and a couple of neighbors from the community who weren't involved with Karen's HOA board. The evening was perfect. People were chatting, enjoying cheese and wine, and watching the sun slowly set over the vineyard rows. That's when the flashing lights appeared. 2 police cars pulled into my long gravel driveway. Their sirens were silent, but their lights were spinning brightly across the vineyard. My stomach dropped. What on earth was happening? One of the officers stepped out and approached us. He looked almost as confused as I felt. He explained that they had received a complaint about an unauthorized commercial operation and a disruptive party taking place on the property. I looked around at our small group of about 10 guests, quietly talking and laughing. I instantly knew exactly who had made that call. Karen. She must have seen the cars pulling into my vineyard earlier and decided this was the perfect opportunity to escalate her ongoing campaign of harassment. I calmly explained to the officers that this was my private property. The gathering was simply a small get-together among friends, and the vineyard was my personal agricultural project that was still under development. The officers were understanding, but they still had procedures to follow. They asked if I could show documentation confirming ownership of the property. While I walked back toward my truck to retrieve the paperwork, I noticed something interesting. Standing at the far edge of a nearby property line were Karen and a few of her HOA board friends. They were watching the entire scene with smug expressions, clearly expecting to witness my public embarrassment. They thought they had caught me breaking some rule. I returned with a folder containing the official property documents and handed them to the officer. He began reviewing the main deed for the vineyard property. After a moment, his expression changed slightly. He flipped through several more pages and raised an eyebrow. Then he slowly looked up from the paperwork, glancing across the surrounding hills before looking back at me. "Sir," he said carefully, "does this deed cover all of this?" As he spoke, he gestured broadly across the valley, not just toward my vineyard, but toward the surrounding land, including the residential community itself. That's when I smiled. "Yes, officer," I replied calmly. "It does." You see, when I purchased a vineyard land, I didn't just buy a small plot. I had worked with a real estate agent to acquire the entire parcel from a family trust that had decided to liquidate its assets. The purchase included several hundred acres of land across the valley. And as it turned out, that parcel also included the land where the harmonious living community had been built. The original developers had never actually owned the land outright. They had signed a long-term lease, and that lease was set to expire in 6 months, meaning that very soon, the new landlord for the entire community would be me. The officer maintained professionalism, but I could tell he was fighting back a small smile. He walked over to Karen, who was standing nearby waiting impatiently for my downfall. I couldn't hear the exact conversation, but I could clearly see her reaction. The smug confidence vanished instantly. The color drained from her face as the reality of the situation sank in. A moment later, the officer returned my documents, tipped his hat politely, and said, "Well, looks like you're the one who owns the whole valley. Have yourself a good evening, sir." The police left shortly after. Karen and her friends quickly disappeared back toward their houses, looking like rats fleeing a sinking ship. The next HOA meeting turned out to be unforgettable. When I walked into the room, the entire place went silent. The news had already spread throughout the neighborhood. Everyone knew. I took my seat while Karen sat stiffly at the front of the room, pale and unable to even make eye contact with me. The usual meeting agenda, complaint about lawns, trash bins, and minor violations, was completely forgotten. Everyone only wanted to know one thing: what was going to happen next? I let the tension sit for a moment before standing up to speak. I assured everyone that I had no intention of kicking anyone out of their homes. My problem had never been with the residents themselves. My problem was with the way the HOA had been aggressively run. Then I made an announcement. The current HOA board would be dissolved. The complicated rulebook filled with petty regulations would be replaced with something far simpler. Instead of obsessing over grass height and trash bins, the community would have a small committee focused only on essential maintenance and neighborhood improvements. I also announced that the community fees would be drastically reduced. The extra money that had previously been used to pay board stipends and legal fees for harassing residents would now go into a community improvement fund. My first project? Building a small park and playground for families in the neighborhood who had quietly endured Karen's rule for years. As for Karen, she sold her house and moved away less than a month later. I heard she relocated to another state, probably searching for a new neighborhood to rule like a personal kingdom. After she left, the atmosphere in the community changed almost overnight. Neighbors started talking again. People helped each other out. It finally began to feel like the peaceful, harmonious place it had always claimed to be. As for my vineyard, it's thriving now. Every year we host a small harvest festival for the community, celebrating the grapes, the wine, and the sense of unity the neighborhood finally found. Funny how things work out sometimes. Karen tried to use rules and power to crush my dream. In the end, she discovered that I owned the entire rule book. Cheers to that. And thanks for listening to my story. If you ever had a crazy HOA encounter yourself, feel free to share it in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.